She wasn't supposed to be out there, barefoot in the valley, dress torn like the coyotes had already gotten to her. But Lydia Marin was running anyway, stumbling through dust and dry brush, chest heaving, eyes wild with something worse than fear. Blood streaked down her shin where barbed wire had caught her during the escape, but she didn't stop to look at it. She couldn't, because somewhere behind her, back in that town where everyone smiled on Sundays and whispered behind their hands on Mondays, someone was looking for her. And if he found her tonight, she wouldn't get another chance to run. The sun was dropping fast over the Nevada hills, painting everything orange and red like the world itself was on fire. Shadows stretched long and hungry across the valley floor. Lydia's throat burned from sobbing, from screaming, from begging people who never listened. Her bare feet slapped against the dirt path, each step sending sharp jolts of pain up her legs. She wrapped her arms tight around herself, not because the desert air was cold, but because she felt like she might fall apart if she didn't hold on. Ahead, through the blur of tears and the haze of exhaustion, she saw it. An old sheep shed leaning sideways near the edge of Ridgewater Ranch. The wood was gray and splintered, like it had been forgotten by time itself. She didn't care. It was shelter. It was somewhere to hide. Her legs buckled the moment she reached it, and she collapsed against the rough planks, gasping, shaking, her whole body folding in on itself like a paper doll left out in the rain. "Someone," she whispered into the empty air. "Please, don't let him find me." The words came out broken, barely loud enough to hear over the wind rustling through the sagebrush. She pressed her forehead against the wood and closed her eyes, waiting for the sound of boots, the low growl of his voice, the moment when it would all be over. But what came instead was silence. And then, hoofbeats. Silas Hart wasn't looking for trouble that evening. He was looking for a broken gate that kept letting his horses wander too close to the main road. He'd spent the better part of the day mending fences, checking water troughs, and avoiding conversations with anyone who might ask him personal questions. That's how he liked it. Quiet. Alone. No complications. He'd been that way ever since his wife passed 3 winters ago. People in town said he'd shut down after that. Turned into a ghost of the man he used to be. They weren't wrong, but Silas didn't see the point in explaining himself. He had his horses, his land, and his memories. That was enough. The sun was almost gone when he spotted her. At first, he thought it was a bundle of old rags someone had dumped near the shed. But then, the bundle moved, just a little, and Silas felt his stomach drop. He dismounted slow, keeping his boots quiet against the ground, and walked toward her like you'd approach a wounded animal. She didn't look up, didn't even seem to know he was there. When he got close enough to see her face, he stopped breathing for a second. She was young, maybe 16, maybe younger. Her hair was tangled and full of burrs, her dress ripped in 3 places, and her feet. Lord, her feet were bleeding, but it was her eyes that got him. Wide, hollow, like she'd seen something no person should ever have to see. Silas crouched down slow, pulling his hat back so she could see his face clearly. He didn't say anything at first, didn't ask questions, didn't demand answers. He just looked at her, really looked, and let her see that he wasn't going to hurt her. Her lips trembled. "Please don't send me back." The words hit him like a punch to the chest. "I won't," he said, and he meant it. He shrugged off his flannel jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders. It swallowed her whole. Then, without another word, he scooped her up like she weighed nothing at all and carried her toward the barn office, her head resting against his chest, her tears soaking through his shirt. Inside the barn office, Lydia sat on an old wooden bench, knees pulled up to her chest, eyes darting toward every sound. The lantern hissed softly on the table. One of the horses stamped its hoof in the stall nearby. Each noise made her flinch, like her whole body was braced for something terrible to happen. Silas poured her a cup of water from the pitcher and set it down beside her without a word. He didn't push, didn't pry. He just sat across from her on an overturned crate, elbows on his knees, waiting. Finally, she spoke. "He comes into my room every night." The words hung in the air like smoke. Silas didn't move, but something cold and sharp settled in his chest. He kept his voice steady. "Who?" "My stepfather." Her voice cracked on the word. "Marcus Leary." Silas felt his jaw tighten. "I tried to tell my mama." Lydia continued staring down at her hands, "but she said I was lying. Said I was just trying to cause trouble because I didn't like him." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "No one in that town believes me. They all think I'm a liar. They all think I'm bad." Her shoulders shook as the sobs came again, harder this time, like something inside her had finally broken open. Silas felt a rage building in his chest, quiet, controlled, but burning hotter than anything he'd felt in years. "He's not even my blood," she added, her voice small and shattered. "Mama married him when I was 10. And now he thinks he owns me." Silas stood up slowly, turning toward the window so she wouldn't see the fury in his eyes. He gripped the edge of the sill and took a long, steady breath. "You're safe here," he said finally. "Nobody's taking you anywhere." It was just past midnight when the wagon rolled onto the property. Silas heard it before he saw it. The creak of wheels, the hard snort of horses, the low murmur of a man's voice. He stepped out onto the porch, rifle resting against his shoulder, and waited. The wagon stopped 20 feet from the barn. A man climbed down, tall and broad-shouldered, with a shotgun tucked under one arm like it was part of his outfit. Marcus Leary. "I'm here for my girl," Marcus called out, his voice loud and entitled. "She ran off, caused all kinds of trouble. I'm taking her home." Silas didn't move from the porch. "She's not going anywhere with you." Marcus took a step forward, his face twisting into something ugly. "You got no right to keep her. She's my girl. I raised her. I fed her. I put a roof over her head." "Not anymore," Silas said, his voice cold as iron. Marcus spat into the dirt. "You think you're some kind of hero? You don't know what you're messing with, old man." Silas finally moved, stepping down off the porch, his boots hitting the ground with quiet authority. "I know exactly what I'm messing with. And I'm telling you right now, turn that wagon around and leave." For a long moment, Marcus just stared at him, his hand twitching near the shotgun. But something in Silas's eyes made him hesitate. Maybe it was the way he stood, still unflinching, like a man who'd already decided how far he was willing to go. Or maybe it was the fact that Silas wasn't shaking, wasn't bluffing, wasn't afraid. Marcus cursed under his breath, climbed back onto the wagon, and snapped the reins. "This ain't over," he shouted as the wagon rolled away. "I'll be back, and I'll bring help." Silas watched until the dust settled. Then he went back inside, locked the door, and checked on Lydia. She was curled up on the bench, eyes wide, trembling like a leaf in the wind. "He's gone," Silas said gently, but they both knew it wasn't over. 3 days later, Silas found fresh footprints near the creek, boot prints, deep and heavy, like someone had been standing there for a while, watching. They weren't Marcus's prints. These belonged to someone bigger, someone who knew how to move quietly. Silas felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. That night, Lydia woke screaming. Silas rushed into the barn office to find her sitting bolt upright, chest heaving, eyes glazed over with terror. She didn't seem to see him at first, just stared past him, like she was still trapped in whatever nightmare had pulled her under. "He's coming," she whispered. "He's coming with his friends." Silas knelt beside her, his voice calm but firm. "Who's coming?" "Men from the mining camps," she said, her voice shaking. "Marcus owes them favors. They're dangerous, Mr. Hart. They've hurt people before. She broke off, covering her face with her hands. Silas didn't sleep that night. He sat on the porch with his rifle across his lap, watching the horizon, listening to every sound the desert made. The wind, the coyotes, the distant hoot of an owl. He was ready. Marcus came back a week later, but this time he wasn't alone. Riding beside him was a man Silas recognized from years ago, Harlan Briggs, ex-railroad guard, known for breaking men's jaws in bar fights and walking away without a scratch. The kind of man people crossed the street to avoid. Silas stepped into the open yard, unarmed this time, hands loose at his sides. Marcus grinned. "Told you I'd be back." Harlan dismounted slowly, his eyes locked on Silas. There was no anger in his expression, just cold, professional assessment. He was here to do a job. But then Harlan stopped. His eyes narrowed. "Silas Hart?" Silas nodded once. Harlan stared at him for a long moment, then let out a slow breath. "You pulled my nephew out of a burning rodeo pen 5 years ago. Saved his life." Silas didn't respond. Harlan turned to Marcus, his voice flat. "I'm not fighting that man." Marcus's face went red. "What? You owe me." "I don't owe you nothing," Harlan said, climbing back onto his horse. "Find someone else." He rode off without another word, leaving Marcus standing there alone, humiliated, shaking with rage. "This ain't over," Marcus hissed, pointing a finger at Silas. "You hear me? This ain't over." But Silas just stood there, silent and still, until Marcus finally turned his horse and rode away. Silas knew it wouldn't end there. Men like Marcus didn't give up. They just got meaner. So the next morning, Silas saddled his horse and rode to Carson Wells, a town 2 hours east. He needed law on his side, and he needed it fast. The marshal's office was small and dusty, with wanted posters nailed to the walls and a single desk piled high with paperwork. Behind the desk sat Marshal Abigail Monroe, one of the few women in law enforcement in the territory. She was sharp, tough, and didn't suffer fools. Silas told her everything. Every word Lydia had said, every mark on her body, every threat Marcus had made. Abigail listened without interrupting, her expression hardening with each detail. When Silas finished, she leaned back in her chair and exhaled slowly. "I'll issue a temporary custody order," she said, "and I'll prepare charges. But you need to know, Marcus has friends, and one of them is Judge Calloway." Silas's jaw tightened. "Calloway's corrupt." "Calloway's complicated," Abigail said carefully. "He doesn't like making waves, especially not for a girl with no family standing up for her." "She's got me," Silas said quietly. Abigail studied him for a moment, then nodded. "All right, then. Let's make this official." For 2 weeks, everything was quiet. Lydia started sleeping through the night. She helped Silas with the horses, learning how to brush them, how to lead them, how to speak to them in that soft, patient way that made them trust her. She even smiled once, just a small, fleeting thing, but Silas caught it, and it made something warm settle in his chest. But on the 15th day, Abigail rode out to the ranch, her face grim. "Marcus is gone," she said. "I went to arrest him this morning, and his cabin was empty. Neighbors said he rode out yesterday before sundown." Silas felt his blood run cold. "Where?" "Headed this way," Abigail said, "toward Ridgewater." The storm hit just after dusk. Lightning split the sky, thunder rolled across the valley like cannon fire, and rain came down in sheets. Silas told Lydia to hide in the barn, behind the sacks of grain, and not to come out no matter what she heard. She nodded, eyes wide with fear, and disappeared into the shadows. Silas waited, and then he heard it, the creak of the barn door. Marcus stepped inside, lantern swinging in his hand, casting wild shadows across the walls. His clothes were soaked, his face twisted with rage. "Lydia!" he called out, his voice sickeningly sweet. "Come on out, sweetheart. It's time to go home." Silas slipped in through the back door, moving silently through the darkness. Marcus walked deeper into the barn, his boots splashing through puddles. "I know you're in here, girl, and when I find you, we're gonna have a long talk about respect." That's when Silas stepped into the light. Marcus whirled around, eyes blazing. "You!" "Leave," Silas said, his voice calm but deadly. "Now!" Marcus lunged. The two men collided, crashing into a stack of hay bales. The lantern flew from Marcus's hand, shattering against the floor, and flames licked up the dry hay. Smoke filled the barn as Silas wrestled Marcus to the ground, pinning him with one knee. And then the door burst open. Marshal Abigail and two deputies rushed in, guns drawn. They hauled Marcus to his feet, dragging him coughing and cursing into the rain as the fire sputtered out. Lydia stumbled out from her hiding place, tears streaming down her face, and Silas pulled her into his arms, holding her tight, while the storm raged around them. At the Carson Wells courthouse 3 weeks later, the evidence was laid bare. Lydia's testimony, the doctor's report, Silas's account, and finally, Lydia's mother, who stood up in front of everyone and admitted she'd been too afraid to believe her daughter. The judge sentenced Marcus Leary to 12 years for assault, endangerment, and attempted kidnapping. Lydia cried when they led him away. Not because she was sad, but because it was finally over. Spring came to Ridgewater Ranch like a quiet promise. Lydia was healthy now, stronger, brighter, more alive than Silas had ever seen her. She helped him train the colts, laughing when they nuzzled her pockets looking for treats. She planted flowers near the porch. She sang while she worked. And Silas realized something he hadn't expected. The ranch felt like a home again. 9 months later, Lydia opened a small schoolhouse in town, teaching children how to read in the barn-turned classroom. Parents called her Miss Lydia, with respect in their voices. One evening, under the cottonwood tree where he'd first found her, Silas asked her a question he'd been carrying for months. "Will you marry me?" She looked at him with eyes full of light and said, "Yes." "If someone broken knocked on your door at sunset, would you turn them away or become the shelter they needed?" If this story moved you, tap the like button so I know you're still listening. Subscribe for the next chapter. Another soul out there is waiting for their story to be told. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there.